The wind cut across the ridge like a blade as Daniel Reeves braced his shoulder against the overturned utility cart. Sparks spit from the ruptured battery pack, lighting the darkness in violent blue flashes. A terrified teenage boy clung to a shattered guardrail just inches from a 100-foot drop. And above it all, Daniel heard the groan of bending steel, the sound that meant the whole platform might give way. His hands were shaking not from fear, but from the memory of another night, another fall he hadn't been able to stop. "Hang on!" he shouted, boots grinding into gravel. The railing snapped again. The boy slipped. Daniel lunged. "Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world." 8 hours earlier, Daniel Reeves was just a 41-year-old maintenance tech finishing a double shift at the Ridgeview Ski Resort in Colorado. Most days he patched heaters, rewired old generators, and coaxed ancient snow machines into cooperating long enough to satisfy weekend tourists. He was good with his hands, always had been, but lately even the simplest repairs felt heavier. Grief does that. It stacks weight on everything it touches. Home was a small rental cabin on the edge of town, where his 12-year-old daughter Harper kept half-finished science projects spread across the kitchen table. She was bright, fiercely independent, and the only reason he managed to get up every morning. 2 years after losing his wife to a sudden stroke, Daniel had built their life around one promise: Harper would always feel safe, no matter what it cost him. It wasn't easy. The bills piled up faster than his overtime hours. His truck needed brakes. His landlord hinted at selling the cabin each time rent was late. But Daniel kept showing up to work, to parenting, to trying. He never complained. That wasn't how he was raised. You fix what you can fix. You endure what you must. On that particular morning, the mountains were just waking up, purple light sliding across the snowcaps as Daniel finished tightening a line of bolts on one of the resort's maintenance platforms. He was thinking about Harper's upcoming science fair and whether they could afford the trip to Denver if she won regionals. He'd promised her they'd find a way. He was packing up his tools when the radio on his belt crackled with frantic static. A lift operator shouting. Something about a runaway cart. Something about a kid. Daniel froze. The upper ridge wasn't supposed to have anyone on it that early, especially not unsupervised. Then came the words that snapped him into motion. "He's slipping! Someone get up here now!" Daniel didn't think. He just ran, boots pounding across the frosted planks, lungs burning in the thin mountain air. As he rounded the last bend and saw the wrecked cart, the teetering platform, and the boy clinging to that broken railing, one truth hit him harder than the cold. This wasn't just another repair job. This was the moment everything in his life, every loss, every lesson, every quiet act of trying had prepared him for. And he was the only one close enough to save that child before the mountain took him. Daniel didn't sleep much after the rescue on the ridge. Even after the boy had been airlifted out and the platform stabilized, a lingering tremor stayed in his hands long into the night. The resort supervisors slapped him on the back, thanked him, took a few quick photos for internal reporting, and sent him home as if saving a life were just another item on his maintenance checklist. No parade, no real conversation, no mention of how close he had come to going over the edge himself. He didn't expect praise, but the quiet ride home in his sputtering truck left him feeling strangely hollow, like he'd stepped back into a life that didn't know what he'd done. Morning sunlight spilled through thin curtains as Harper shuffled into the kitchen in her dinosaur pajama pants, hair sticking up in every direction. "Dad, you look tired," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Did you fix something big yesterday?" He forced a smile. "Something like that." She grinned, unfazed, already digging into her cereal. Her innocence steadied him the way nothing else could. He packed her lunch, tucked the note she liked finding in her bag, and drove her to school through the winding mountain roads. She didn't notice the way he winced each time he flexed his shoulder, the shoulder that had slammed into the platform when he'd lunged for the boy. He didn't want her to notice. After dropping her off, he drove up to the resort for his shift. It hadn't even been half a day since he'd kept a kid from falling to his death. Yet things looked painfully normal. Snowcats rumbled in the distance. Lift chairs waited in their slow march up the mountain. The maintenance shop smelled like oil metal and old coffee. Then the day reminded him where he stood. His supervisor, Brent Collier, was already pacing outside the maintenance shed, red-faced and irritated, holding a clipboard with the kind of authority only middle management could convince themselves they possessed. Reeves Brent barked before Daniel even stepped out of the truck. "Get over here." Daniel swallowed his fatigue. "Morning, Brent." "Nothing good about it," Brent snapped. "You want to explain why the Mountain Ops crew is filing complaints about you?" Daniel blinked. "Complaints about what happened yesterday?" "No," Brent said, waving him off. "About everything else you didn't do. The south lift still isn't rewired. The snowmakers on the west trail keep tripping breakers. And the resort president wants a report on the incident, but your notes were—" He jabbed a finger at the clipboard, incomplete. Daniel stared at him. "I saved a child's life yesterday. I wrote what mattered." "Saved a child's life," Brent repeated with exaggerated air quotes. "Great. Wonderful. We'll send you a cookie. But you don't get to skip protocol. Around here, rules matter." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Protocol means nothing if that kid went over the edge. Brent stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Watch yourself. You think one lucky moment makes you some kind of hero? This place doesn't run on heroics. It runs on paperwork and reliability. You've been slipping lately, Reeves. Long before yesterday." It wasn't the first time Brent hinted at replacing him. The resort had been quietly trimming older workers, bringing in younger techs for cheaper wages. Daniel had seen the writing on the wall, but hearing it out loud still landed like a punch. He forced calm into his voice. "What do you want from me right now? I want you to stop thinking you're special," Brent said. "Get to the south lift, and don't screw up again." Brent walked off, leaving Daniel standing in the cold with a pain blooming behind his ribs. He'd risked his life less than 24 hours ago, and here he was treated like dead weight. He drove the utility truck up to the south lift, the silence inside the cab heavy. As the truck climbed higher, his thoughts drifted back to the moment the boy's fingers slipped. The fear, the instinct, the sound of twisting metal. He'd done the right thing, but the resort clearly wanted the whole incident swept under the rug. He worked for hours in bitter wind, replacing wiring that should have been upgraded years ago. His fingers stiffened from the cold. His shoulder protested every reach. By noon, he had the lift running again, though the ache in his body had settled deeper. At lunchtime, he ducked into the employee lodge for warmth. A group of younger seasonal workers sat around a table snickering over something on a phone screen. When Daniel walked past, one of them smirked. "Hey, hero," the kid said. "Any more railings you want to break today?" The others laughed. Daniel turned. "Excuse me." "Come on," another chimed in. We all heard. "You almost took out half the platform trying to play Superman. Brent said you made the situation worse." Daniel's stomach twisted. That railing was already compromised. If I hadn't gotten there? Yeah, the first kid interrupted. "You're lucky nobody's filing safety complaints against him for preventing a fatality." He walked away before the anger could swallow him. He didn't want a scene. He couldn't afford a scene. But the words sank into the same cracks Brent had widened earlier. Lucky, reckless, a problem. He went back to work. By late afternoon, snow flurries drifted across the mountains, settling into the creases of his jacket. His radio crackled again, Brent's voice ordering him to check power at the upper gondola station. Daniel suppressed a groan. The hike alone would take nearly 40 minutes. But orders were orders. He strapped on his tool belt and began the climb, boots crunching through fresh snow. The wind stung against his face, but the solitude gave him a moment to breathe. Up here, he didn't have to explain himself. Up here, no one questioned the worth of a man doing his best. He reached the station, checked the circuits, and found the issue: an electrical surge had tripped an overload relay. He replaced the part and reset everything. As he worked, his thoughts drifted to Harper. She would be home soon from school. He tried to imagine her face when she saw the model volcano she'd been painting the night before. She never complained when he worked late, never guilted him, but each missed dinner carved into him just the same. His radio buzzed again. Reeves Brent barked, "Management wants you down at admin after your shift. Something about yesterday's report." Daniel stiffened. "Can it wait until morning?" "No," Brent snapped. "They said now." He paused. "Brent, is something wrong? Just get down here." The radio clicked off. He made the long descent in worsening wind. Snow iced the steps, forcing him to cling to the railing, ironically sturdy, unlike the one that had nearly cost the boy his life. When he reached the parking area, he saw Harper sitting in the lobby window beside the front desk, swinging her feet. His heart sank. He walked inside, snow trailing behind him. Harper's eyes lit up, but he noticed the worry underneath. "Dad," she said, rushing to him. "The bus driver said you weren't home, so the office called the resort, and they said you were still working. Someone brought me here because they didn't want me waiting alone." Her voice trembled on the edges. Daniel crouched to her height, ignoring the stabbing in his shoulder. "I'm sorry, Bug. I didn't know they'd keep me this late." "You okay?" She nodded, but the small crease between her eyebrows told another story. He stood and approached the front desk. The manager, a thin woman with a tight smile, stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves, we really can't have your daughter waiting here," she said quietly. "It isn't appropriate. Employees aren't supposed to treat the resort as childcare." Heat flared in Daniel's cheeks. "I didn't ask anyone to bring her here. The school did that because I was still working." "Well," she replied, voice soft but firm, "perhaps you should plan better. We can't accommodate personal issues during business hours." Harper heard that. Daniel saw her shoulders inch inward the way she always did when adults spoke sharply around her. He drew a slow breath. "I'll take her home. But I was called to admin first." The manager pointed toward the hallway. "They're waiting." Harper slipped her hand into his. "Dad, are you in trouble?" He squeezed gently. "No, just grown-up stuff. You sit right here, okay? I won't be long." She nodded, but her eyes followed him with fear she tried hard to hide. He walked down the hall, boots echoing on polished tile, heart pounding harder with each step. At the far end, a conference room door stood partly open. Voices drifted out, sharp, agitated. Reckless behavior, liability, protocol violations. Should have waited for trained personnel. Daniel froze in the doorway. 3 people sat at the table, the resort president, the legal consultant, and Brent, arms crossed, chin lifted in smug satisfaction. A printed photo sat in the center of the table, a blurry shot of Daniel grabbing the boy's jacket as the platform buckled. The angle made the moment look chaotic, dangerous, borderline out of control. Brent turned with a thin smile. "Speak of the devil." Daniel stepped inside, pulse thundering. The president folded her hands. "Mr. Reeves, we need to discuss your conduct yesterday. There are concerns about how you handled the situation." He stared at them, stunned. Concerns. About saving a child. His breath hitched. His daughter was outside, scared and waiting. His job hung in the balance, and every accusation in that room felt like a weight pressing down on a fracture already forming inside him. The president continued, "Your actions may have put the resort at legal risk. We need a full incident review before we determine next steps." Daniel's jaw set. Everything in him tightened toward breaking. Something big was coming, he could feel it. Daniel felt the walls closing in around him as the president's words hung in the air. The hum of the heater, the distant chatter from the lobby, even the soft scuff of Harper's shoes waiting outside, all of it faded beneath the heavy throb of his pulse. He heard the legal consultant shuffling papers, clearing her throat, as if preparing to deliver another blow. Brent leaned back in his chair, satisfied, already savoring the fallout he'd engineered. But before anyone could speak again, the resort radio on the conference table erupted with a burst of frantic static. "Emergency at the North Ridge, repeat, emergency at the North Ridge gondola car, stalled mid-span. Possible line freeze. There are guests inside, 2 adults and a child. Car is unstable, wind is picking up. We need maintenance immediately." The president jolted upright. Brent reached for the radio, fumbling. "This is Collier. Where the hell is the rescue team? They're 40 minutes out," the dispatcher shot back. Weather grounded the helicopter. "We need eyes on that car now." A tremor rolled through the building as a gust slammed against the windows. A winter front moving in early. Sharp, punishing winds that cut across the higher altitudes like a blade. The legal consultant looked at the president. "If that gondola car drops..." "Don't say it," the president whispered. She turned to Brent. "Get your team up there." Brent swallowed. "My team? They're not trained for rescue conditions. And anyway, Reeves is the one on call today." All eyes turned to Daniel, as if destiny itself had stepped into the room and pointed straight at him. He didn't move. Not yet. He thought of Harper outside, clutching her backpack, listening to adults scold her father for being late. He thought of the boy dangling from the railing the day before. He thought of Lisa, how she'd once said he had a gift for staying calm when other people panicked. He pushed back his chair. "Where's the last GPS ping on that gondola car?" The president blinked. "Are you saying you'll go?" Brent scoffed. "He just got done causing one disaster. Now you want him running toward another?" "He's a liability." Daniel's voice cut through the room like a steady hand. "Put the map on the screen." The president grabbed the tablet and brought up the live gondola feed. A single car hung mid-span between towers, swaying violently. Snow was starting to fall sideways, never a good sign. Daniel leaned in. The winds at that elevation will overload the line anchors. If the ice buildup keeps spreading, the haul rope could jump the track. If that happens, the car drops. The consultant finished quietly. Daniel nodded. Somebody needs to reach the tower and manually realign the guide sheaves before the line twists any further. If we stabilize the track, the car might hold until the rescue crew arrives. The president stared at him. "Only a certified climber can attempt that." "I'm certified," Daniel said. "Was for 20 years. Brent scoffed again. "He hasn't climbed a tower in years." Daniel picked up his jacket. "Still can." No one stopped him this time. He stepped out into the lobby where Harper sat small and fearful, clutching her coat. "Dad." He knelt, brushing a hand against her cheek. "I have to help some people, Bug. They're stuck up on the mountain." "Is it dangerous?" He didn't lie. "A little." Her eyes shone with the beginnings of tears. "Then don't go." The words sliced him open. But he felt his promise to her unspoken, but ever present. To be the man her mother would have wanted. to show her that courage wasn't something you talked about. It was something you did when it mattered. He lifted her chin. "Do you remember what Mom used to say about helping people?" Harper nodded. She said, "If someone needs you and you can help, you don't walk away." "That's right." He kissed her forehead. "Wait here with the nice lady at the desk. I'll be back before dinner. Okay?" Her voice trembled. "Promise, I promise." He turned before she could see the fear in his eyes. By the time he reached the service snowmobile and loaded his gear, wind had thickened the air with swirling ice. The climb toward North Ridge was brutal. Every exposed inch of skin stung. The mountain, beautiful and serene the day before, had turned hostile. Halfway up, the gondola line came into view. The stalled car dangled like a trapped bird tossed around by the storm. Inside, silhouettes moved frantically, one adult trying to shield the child each time the car lurched. Daniel pressed harder on the throttle. His breath fogged the visor of his helmet. When he reached the base of the support tower, he scanned the situation. Ice had formed thick crusts along the upper wheels. The guide sheave on the left side was cocked slightly, exactly what he feared. If the line twisted another few degrees, the rope could slip free. He radioed the resort. "I'm at the tower. Visual confirms misalignment. I'm going up." Static crackled. "Copy, Reeves. Proceed with caution." He slung the climbing harness around his waist and secured the locking carabiners with practiced precision. His fingers remembered the motions even if years had passed since he'd last performed them. He tested the anchor. Solid. The tower loomed above him, a lattice of cold steel disappearing into white sky. He took a breath, then another. He began to climb. Wind punched him sideways, but he hugged the metal frame, anchoring one boot, then the other, hauling himself upward. 30 feet, 40, 50. The ground below blurred into a smear of white and shadow. Halfway up his shoulder screamed with pain, the same shoulder he'd slammed into the platform yesterday. He paused only long enough to grit his teeth and keep going. Higher, higher. By the time he reached the maintenance platform near the top, the gondola car hung just yards away. He could hear the child crying inside. The woman's voice, strained with fear, rose above the wind. "Please, somebody help us." Daniel steadied himself and forced calm into his voice. "I'm here. I'm going to fix this. You just hold tight." The father looked at him through the glass eyes wide with desperate hope. Daniel crawled along the narrow beam toward the sheave assembly. Ice coated everything. He chipped at it with his crowbar fingers, stiffening. Each gust rattled the tower so violently he had to cling to the steel to stay upright. He checked the alignment. The wheel had shifted nearly 2 inches. Another quarter turn, and the rope would have slipped. He shouted into the wind. "I need a breaker bar. Someone, get me a breaker bar." No one answered. Rescue crews were still too far out. He looked again at the trapped family, their faces pressed to the frozen windows, waiting on him. His breath clouded around him as he whispered to the wind, "Come on, Lisa. Help me out one more time." He braced his boots, grabbed the frozen metal with both hands, and pushed every tendon, screaming muscles shaking under the cold. The sheave resisted, groaning like something alive. He pushed harder. Then a crack split the air. The wheel shifted. Just enough. The line snapped back into its track with a sound like the mountain exhaling. The car steadied. The family inside cried out, not in fear this time, but relief. Daniel sagged against the tower chest, heaving. He keyed his radio. "Alignment restored. Car is stable. Repeat, car is stable." The response was almost immediate. The president's voice shaken, breathless. "Reeves, everyone here just saw the feed. You saved them. "Stay put. The rescue team is minutes away." But he wasn't done. Ice was still forming on the opposite side. If another wheel shifted, the same nightmare could replay. "Not waiting," he said. "I'm finishing the job." And he did, clearing ice, reinforcing anchors, making sure that gondola would hold if the storm doubled in fury. Below, the rescue team arrived and guided the family to safety once the car reached the station. The mother hugged her daughter so tightly the child squeaked. The father looked around for the man who saved them. Up on the tower, Daniel Reeves stood against the storm, silent, steady, a silhouette carved into steel and sky. And everyone watching, from the rescue crew to the president to the seasonal workers who'd mocked him, finally understood the truth. He wasn't a liability. He wasn't a burden. He wasn't someone past his prime. He was the man who climbed a frozen tower in a blizzard and kept strangers alive because he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try. When he descended at last, covered in ice and exhaustion, the shift in the air was unmistakable. People parted for him. People stared. People whispered his name with something he hadn't heard in a long time. Respect. Snow still clung to Daniel's jacket like frostbite glitter as he stepped off the rescue sled and onto solid ground again. The wind had eased the storm, losing its fury as quickly as it had built, leaving behind a strange hush over the North Ridge station. Rescue personnel moved around him with frantic purpose, checking equipment, stabilizing ropes, ushering the family toward a warming hut, but their eyes kept drifting back to him. Not just glances, stares, relief, disbelief, gratitude, shock. Every emotion flickered across their faces, like they were watching a man they thought they knew turn into someone they'd never seen before. The father of the little girl approached him first, his hands trembling as he removed his gloves. He didn't speak. He simply grabbed Daniel's forearm with both hands, squeezing like he needed proof the man existed. Daniel nodded once. "You're safe now. That's what matters." The mother burst into tears. The child buried her face in her father's chest. And all the while, the workers, the same ones who had mocked him hours earlier, stood back in stunned silence. No one seemed to know what to say. The world had tilted, and the man they'd laughed at over lunch had just climbed a frozen tower to stop a tragedy. Brent arrived last, snow caking his hairline, out of breath from running uphill after the rescue team. He stopped a few feet away, eyes flicking from the gondola to Daniel, to the crew still buzzing around. His jaw hung open for a beat before he snapped it shut. But he didn't speak. Couldn't speak. The president approached slowly, one gloved hand pressed against her heart, the way people do when they witness something undeniable, something that forces them to reconsider everything they thought they understood. "Mr. Reeves," she began, but her voice failed. She cleared her throat. "Daniel, that climb, the conditions, no one here has ever attempted something like that." Daniel shrugged, adjusting the harness still hanging at his hip. "Someone needed to go up. I was here." "That's not all," she said softly. "Your technique, the way you handled the top assembly, that wasn't just experience, that was specialized." He looked away, suddenly uncomfortable under the weight of everyone's attention. "I used to climb more, that's all." Brent finally found his voice, thin, shaky. "That was more than climbing. The rescue crew said you executed a corrective maneuver they only teach in advanced safety courses. How did you even—" Before Brent could finish, one of the older rescue techs stepped forward, Gus, a man with a gravelly voice and 20 years of mountain operations under his belt. He'd been around long enough to know the rhythm of the slopes and the history of the people who worked them. He studied Daniel with narrowed eyes. "I've seen that move before," he said finally, "but only once." Everyone turned to him. Gus took a step closer. It was at Three Peaks about, 15 years ago, a cable car derailed in a storm. The mechanic on duty climbed a 70-foot support tower without a rope line because the belay rig froze. Realigned the sheave by hand. Saved 8 people. Wind brushed a hush through the group. Gus tilted his head. That mechanic's name was Reeves, too. Daniel Reeves. Murmurs broke out, small at first, then swelling as recognition spread. People who had thought they knew him, people who'd only known the quiet maintenance guy who fixed heaters and light switches, now stared at him like a ghost from another world had stepped into their snow boots. But it wasn't just the rescue they were reacting to. It was the story behind it. The story no one at the resort knew. Because Daniel had never told them. He'd buried it deep the way people bury things that hurt too much to carry. The president stepped closer, her expression softening into something human. Is it true? Daniel drew a slow breath, letting it fog into the frigid air. I worked mountain rescue for years, back before Harper was born, before Lisa got sick. Silence stretched, heavy, respectful. He wasn't bragging, he wasn't defending himself. He was simply acknowledging a truth he'd stopped saying out loud, a truth that had once defined him before grief reshaped his life. I left after that incident, he continued quietly. Not because of the job. Because... He swallowed. Because I promised Lisa I'd take safer work once we started a family. Several workers lowered their eyes, some out of shame, some out of understanding, all out of respect. The president exhaled, as if a knot she'd carried all morning finally loosened. We've had you patching leaky radiators and resetting breakers, she said softly, while you were capable of... This. Daniel shook his head. I didn't want special treatment. Just wanted to do my job. Keep my daughter safe. That's all. Brent's face reddened first from cold, then from embarrassment. He took a step forward, opening his mouth as if to defend himself, but nothing came out. All the criticisms he'd hurled, all the condescension, all the dismissals, they hung in the air like a bitter smoke he couldn't clear. No one rushed to rescue him from it. Gus let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned. All these years you've been under our noses and we never knew. Daniel gave a faint, tired smile. Didn't seem important anymore. But the president shook her head. Daniel, what you did today saved lives. And what you did years ago saved lives. That matters. That always matters. A wave of emotion hit him, unexpected, fierce, almost enough to buckle his knees. Because for the first time in a long time, someone acknowledged not what he owed the world, but what he had given it. The mother of the rescued child approached her steps tentative on the icy ground. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him. Her shoulders shook as tears soaked into his jacket. Thank you, she whispered, voice cracking. Thank you for bringing my baby back to me. Daniel closed his eyes. A memory flickered, Lisa holding their newborn daughter, whispering promises of a future he'd sworn to protect. When the woman stepped back, a strange quiet fell over the group. A collective breath. A collective shift. The president cleared her throat again, but this time her voice carried something new, certainty. Mr. Reeves, Daniel, we need to discuss something, and it can't wait. He raised an eyebrow. All right, she gestured toward the rescue hut. Come inside, warm up. There's an opportunity the resort wants to offer you, something in leadership, something suited to the skills you clearly still possess. Brent stiffened. The color drained from his face. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. But the president didn't stop there. She looked Daniel directly in the eyes. We can't afford to lose someone like you again. Not to paperwork, not to mismanagement, not to our own blindness." Her words landed with the weight of a second rescue, one he hadn't expected, one he hadn't asked for, but one he suddenly realized he needed. Behind him, Harper appeared at the edge of the station platform, wrapped in a blanket one of the workers had given her. Her small face lit up when she saw him. "Dad," she called, breaking into a run. Daniel caught her, lifting her into his arms despite the ache in his shoulder. She clung to him like he was the only solid thing in the world. "You came back," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "Always." The president watched them with an expression that mixed admiration and something else, resolve. "When you're ready," she said gently, "I'd like to talk to you about a position that would change things for you and for your daughter." Daniel looked at Harper, then at the people around him, the ones who'd judged him, the ones who'd mocked him, the ones who now stood humbled and silent. He felt the mountain wind ease against his skin, as if even the storm had paused to listen. A choice lay ahead. A new path. A chance to reclaim a part of himself he'd buried when life had grown too heavy. He tightened his hold on Harper. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I'm ready to hear it." And with that, the future shifted, opening in front of him, like a trail newly carved through snow, waiting for the man who had once again proven he knew how to climb. The sun slipped behind the ridge by the time Daniel and Harper made it back to the warming hut, but the air inside was bright with a different kind of warmth. Every worker they passed stepped aside for him, not out of fear, but out of regard. The same young techs who had mocked him at lunch approached with red cheeks and lowered eyes, offering shy nods that were as close to apologies as their pride allowed. Even Brent managed a stiff acknowledgement, though the humiliation in his posture said more than any speech could. Inside the hut, the president waited with 2 members of the operations board. No conference table this time, no accusations waiting on paper. Just 3 people who suddenly understood the weight of the man standing in front of them. She got right to the point. "Daniel, we reviewed the footage from today and yesterday. You didn't just perform under pressure, you prevented 2 catastrophic incidents. We should have seen your leadership long before now, and that's on us." The board member beside her added, "We want to offer you the position of Director of Mountain Safety and Maintenance. Full authority over training, rescue readiness, infrastructure upgrades, everything this resort should have taken seriously before today. Better pay, better hours, a future." Harper squeezed his hand so tightly he felt her tiny pulse against his palm. Her eyes sparkled in a way he hadn't seen since before Lisa got sick. Hopeful, steady, proud. He swallowed hard. "Why me?" The president smiled softly. "Because you've already been doing the job. We were just too blind to notice." And for once, Daniel didn't shrug off the compliment. He looked around at the faces at the mountain outside, at the life he'd been fighting to rebuild piece by piece. He thought of Harper's science projects, of the nights he'd sat at the kitchen table convinced he was failing her. He felt something gentle settle inside him, like a long frozen river finally beginning to thaw. "All right," he said. "I'll do it." Applause broke out in that little hut. Real applause. Not the kind that filled a quota, but the kind that comes from people who see someone clearly for the first time. The weeks that followed felt like stepping into someone else's life. For the first time in years, Daniel wasn't scrambling from job to job, praying something wouldn't break before he could fix it. He trained new rescue personnel, rewrote outdated manuals, replaced failing equipment that no one had bothered to inspect. He became a steady presence across the mountain, someone workers sought out not just for answers, but for guidance. And the resort changed too. Procedures tightened. Safety drills became mandatory. A scholarship fund for mountain area kids appeared quietly in the newsletter, named after no one in particular, but funded by someone who'd once watched a man climb a frozen tower for reasons that transcended his paycheck. As for Brent, he was moved into a strictly administrative role, paperwork only. The crew joked he was finally where he always wanted to be, behind a desk, far from anything that required courage. But Daniel never mocked him. He simply nodded politely when their paths crossed, offering the same quiet respect he gave everyone else. Sometimes the greatest consequence is realizing you misjudged someone beyond repair. At home, life softened. Harper's science project took first place in the district fair, and Daniel made every meeting, every practice, every bedtime story. They fixed up the old cabin together on weekends, turning it from a place of survival into a place of belonging. The fear of losing it loosened its grip by degrees. Daniel could almost measure warmth in the living room laughter, in the kitchen drawings taped proudly to the fridge. Months later, when the resort held its annual season kickoff, the president asked Daniel to speak. He rarely spoke in public, but he agreed for reasons he didn't fully understand until he stood on the small wooden stage, looking out at the workers, the community, and his daughter, cheering from the front row. He told them about courage, not the loud kind, not the quick kind, but the kind that wakes up every morning and keeps showing up even when no one sees it. The kind that fixes broken things quietly. The kind that children learn not from speeches, but from watching the hands that carry them through storms. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. But Daniel didn't need it. He already felt the reward steady and rooted in the life he'd rebuilt. On the last day of the season, he and Harper hiked up a short trail overlooking the North Ridge. Snowmelt dripped from pines, and the air smelled of earth waking up. Harper slipped her hand into his, swinging their arms playfully. "Dad," she said, "do you ever miss the old rescue job?" He thought about it. The sirens, the adrenaline, the weight of being the one people depended on in the darkest moments. He thought about Lisa's smile, the promise he had made, the years he'd spent pretending he was fine when he wasn't. Sometimes he said, "But I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be now." Harper beamed. "Me too." They reached the overlook, the mountains stretching out beneath them like a second chance carved in stone. Daniel took a long breath of cold air, letting it fill every corner of him. He realized something then, something simple and steady and true. Life doesn't always give second chances. But sometimes, if you keep showing up, if you keep fixing what you can, if you keep your heart open just wide enough, life gives you something better. A way forward. A way home. And standing there with his daughter beside him and the mountain quiet at last, Daniel Reeves finally believed what everyone else had seen, long before he dared to. He had never stopped being the man who climbed towers in storms. He had only forgotten his own strength for a little while.